Hey folks, you guys ready to get started today? Thanks for having me. I know folks just came from another meeting, so appreciate you staying around to hear my spiel. My name is Matt, and I work with CUB, or the Citizens Utility Board. We're going to be talking about quite a few things, but it's mostly going to be centered around our electric and our gas bills. By show of hands, how many of you are familiar with CUB? Look at that. Excellent. So for those who might need a refresher, but it seems like most folks here know, but we'll still go through the spiel of who we are. We are a nonprofit organization that fights the utility companies on your behalf as ratepayers in the state of Illinois. So what that looks like is that whenever the utility companies attempt to raise their rates, pass some legislation that isn't very consumer friendly, we of course are the folks who go after them on your behalf again as ratepayers. If there's one thing you remember today, let it be that we have that hotline number there, that 1-800 number. I hope you remember a couple things, but this is a really important one to remember. It's that 1-800-669-5556 number that is open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. We have some amazing folks who staff that line that can answer any questions you might have. Electric, gas, solar, even like what the heck is streaming? Can I cut my cord and like move over to streaming services to save money? We answer all those questions. We have some amazing folks who can answer any of that, again, Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. And then we have our website, that citizensutilityboard.org link. All of our resources are housed directly on there. So everything that I'm going to be speaking about today, go to our website. We have all those fact sheets over there, directly online, and a bunch of other stuff too. So I'm a part of the outreach department at CUB, and we do a ton of events every single year. It's about 500, believe it or not, all across the state of Illinois. And there's only about, I would say 5 or 6 of us in the outreach department, so I spend a lot of time in spaces like this one. We do them virtually, we do them in person. Of course, we changed a little bit during COVID. We do a lot of stuff virtual. However, if you want to check out one of our events that might be a little bit different than this one, you can go to our website, and on our main toolbar up there, you can click down and there's a calendar link, and we have all of our events listed up there. So if you're curious about something like solar, or maybe one of the topics that we discussed today in just a little bit of detail, but we're hoping that you could see something that's like a little more focused in on that particular subject, you can check that out on our calendar. And then of course we have a ton of fact sheets, media and publications. Our communications team does a 10 out of 10 job boiling down some of this information in ways that we can all understand it, because I'm sure you guys know, utilities can be complicated. When you get that utility bill, it's like, what the heck is going on here? People are coming door to door, asking various questions about, have you ever thought about solar, stuff like that. So our comms team does an amazing job of breaking this info down in a way that, frankly, I can understand it, so I can come to spaces like this and talk about it. And then, of course, it's a good resource for folks in this room. Then lastly, we advocate for affordable and sustainable energy policies here in Illinois. The reason I mention this is we're going to talk a little bit about solar if we have time. But I think we're at a point in time where climate change is a thing that's here, something that we're dealing with in the Midwest and frankly across the globe. And ultimately, there are going to be policies that are being developed to combat that, right? And as a consumer advocacy organization, we think it's important that, of course, we have these policies, but also that these policies are being developed in a way that saves us money. We think you can have kind of two situations, right? You can have climate change packages that can be kind of expensive, cost folks a lot of money, or we have packages like the Future Energy Jobs Act that we passed in 2016, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act that we passed in 2021, that creates opportunities for savings and opportunities for access to things like renewable energy, regardless of income, regardless of where you live. We want to make sure that this stuff is accessible as we start to build it out here in Illinois. So, folks, have any questions before we move on to the fun stuff here? And of course, if you have any questions in real time, go ahead and raise your hand. If you have a question, most likely somebody else has a question, right? So feel free to ask those as we go. So we're going to start with our ComEd bill. And we do these events called utility bill clinics, where we go to rooms like this one, sit down with folks, analyze their bills. We look at gas, electric, telephone bills. And I'm going to go through some of the things that I look for when I'm at a utility bill clinic. Like, what does the CUB expert look for when he's analyzing a bill? The first thing is that yellow circle, that yellow oval there. That is our usage chart. This is probably one of the most important pieces of our bill, because this is where you can see what you're using month to month. Specifically, and this is an older bill, this is from 2020. I probably need to update this, although all the info is still the same as you would see it on your bill today in 2023. But on this particular bill, the current billing cycle is in October. So you can see that's the most far right bar. It's the blue one. You can look at this October, compare it to last October, right? And I think that particular relationship is really important, because there, you can identify any inconsistencies that you might be experiencing. So on this particular bill, you can see this October is 201 kWh or kilowatt hours. That's the measurement for electricity. And then the previous October was 52 kilowatt hours. It's a pretty big jump, or a pretty big difference. And that would require some detective work, right? In this particular bill, I don't know whose bill this is, but they moved in that billing cycle. So that's the reason it's a little bit lower, right? And that could be explained in your situation. Maybe you moved. Maybe, you're seeing a big inconsistency because you had the kids at home, right? They're staying with you for a month. Or, maybe you got a new hot tub. I don't know. When you see these inconsistencies, you need to start asking questions and do a little bit of detective work to try to identify why you're seeing it. One of the best ways to kind of hone in even further on that particular piece is if you look to the right there, the average daily use charts. You can see it's like the very first one's in teal. It says current month, and then last month, and then last year on the right side. It shows you how many kilowatt hours that you're using day to day, but it also shows you how much you're up or down from the previous year. And that's really important because in this case, up 272%. And if you saw that on your bill, that would be a massive red flag, right? That's a massive jump. So that would, again, require some detective work, thinking about things like energy efficiency. Has your furnace, your air conditioning been running okay? Any weird noises? Things like that. However, again, on this particular bill, this consumer moved during that time, which is why you see that big jump. And then you can also, at the top right, see what the average temperature is. And that part's really important because we live in Chicagoland area. We have very weird weather, as you all know, especially in the transition months. It could be really cold or really warm in October, and the same is true for May. You could have like a random cold day in May. So you could see a change in the average temperature, and that could be why you're seeing that difference. This is a little more important, I would say, with gas, but we'll get to that. But it's still some info that you can use when you're doing that detective work. And then, of course, if you look down, last month, last year, you can see that same information for previous months, which is important. So this is a good place to just kind of see how you're doing, to look to see if you're seeing any big jumps where they shouldn't be. Stuff's important. Now, if you look to the bottom, that's the current charges summary. This is just a general breakdown. It's like where our money's going on our bill. Our bill's broken down into 3 different pieces: supply, delivery, taxes and fees, and you can see where the money's going there. And you can also see if you have a different company on your bill. We're going to get to that in a second. So all of that information on the bottom half of the bill, supply, delivery, taxes, and fees, you can see a breakdown on the back part of your bill, which is probably the most important part of the bill, because you can see exactly where your money's going, right? It's a bunch of gobbledygook. It's very hard to determine what's what, but I'm going to try to help. It's mostly, again, these 3 big categories. So we'll start with taxes and fees. Not a ton you can do there. A lot of stuff like the renewable energy we have that we're funding here in Illinois is paid for there. Like, for example, they have renewable portfolio standard, and this person's paying 38 cents a month into this bucket of money that we're all paying into to help fund renewable energy projects. Same with energy efficiency programs. A lot of the cool energy efficiency programs we have directly tied to taxes and fees, and this person's paying 27 cents. It's not a make or break on your bill, but it's just like collective funding that we have to do some cool programs. That's what happens on taxes and fees. Not a ton you can do there. Most of the line items are multiplied by how much you're using, so you could use less, be more energy efficient. You would see a reduction there, but easier said than done, obviously. And then we have our delivery, which is the middle piece there. And if you live in northern Illinois, plus or minus a few communities that have municipal utilities, you're going to be with ComEd. ComEd owns the infrastructure here in northern Illinois that gets our energy from point A to point B. Point A being generation, point B being our homes. And you essentially pay a fee for that. It's a pretty large fee in a lot of cases, and there's not much you could do about that, right? I do tell folks, they're like, well, it's a big part of my bill. There's got to be a way I can reduce it, right? And I always say there's 2 things you can do. The bottom 2 kind of like fees that are set there are based on how much you use. So again, if you use less, pay less. But then you could stay in contact with CUB, because whenever you hear about a rate hike or the utilities trying to raise money somewhere on our bills, typically it happens on the delivery section of our bill. And CUB has a policy team, 2 attorneys that go to Springfield or Chicago or wherever they're hosting the meeting, and they fight that on your behalf as a ratepayer. So if you want to see reductions on the delivery, stay in contact with CUB, because we need that kind of help. We have 2 attorneys that are fighting all of the utilities. And I don't know if folks are aware, but every single utility in Illinois is asking for more money right now. And our attorneys are swamped. It's a very challenging job because they're going up against some really well-paid folks to do that stuff. So the more we have people supporting us with petitions, coming to rooms like this one, telling your friends and neighbors about this stuff does help, grassroots power kind of stuff. So that's delivery section, essentially the infrastructure where you're paying for that. And that brings us to supply, which the supply is where you pay for what you're using. So this is like the big piece of the bill, right? And by show of hands, how many of you know about how much you pay per kilowatt hour for electricity? Couple people. How many of you know about how much you pay for a gallon of gas, let's say for your vehicle? Most folks, right? I would argue that you use electricity way more than you use gas in your car. If we can just use this room as an example, right? We could probably point out 10 to 20 different things just in this room alone that are contributing to the village's overall electricity bill. The same is true for your home, right? All of these things that we're doing in our home build up to make our electricity bill. But there are different companies in the electricity market that can take over the supply portion of your bill, just like a different gas station, right? Essentially, and if you're driving your car and some guy down the street is charging $10 for a gallon of gas, you gonna pay that? Probably not, right? You're gonna go a mile down or whatever, and you're gonna go pay whatever the normal rate is right now, which is like $3 or $4. Same is true for electricity. There are a lot of different vendors in the market, and they're constantly trying to solicit you, right? Have folks had any of these groups come to your door? Have you seen some stuff online, mailers? See some folks nodding their heads. They're everywhere. Oftentimes we see them sending stuff out in the mail. I've been seeing them at like farmers markets lately. They'll have like the quote unquote green energy contracts that they're selling there, so they'll hang out at farmers markets. I've seen them at the movie theaters before. You need to be very careful with these companies because oftentimes these companies are selling contracts that are much more expensive than what the default utility is charging, which is ComEd in this case. So if you were to like set up a new account, right, you move, you need to set up a new electricity account, you're going to default to ComEd. And then you have the choice to stay with ComEd or you can shop around the market. There's also something called the municipal aggregation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Municipalities can switch you over to a different contract. But this particular scenario is when an individual company does a solicitation to you, again, like at your door, through a mailer, at the farmer's market. This bill does have a company. It's Energy Plus Holdings. And you can see that supply, there's a hyphen, and then it says Energy Plus Holdings. One of the easiest ways you can tell if you have a supplier is if you flip back to the front where this blue box is, you can see it says supply, and then it says Energy Plus Holdings. If you just had ComEd, it would just say ComEd provides your energy, right? But if you have a different company, you will see it here. And they have their telephone number as well, sometimes a website. Sure, go ahead.
So our village is from time to time on an aggregation?
Yes.
Does that show up? Because I've never seen it show up like that.
It should show up. So I'll actually bounce to this. We'll jump a little forward and we'll come back. So the rate for electricity right now through ComEd is 6.8 cents. Changes 2 times a year, once in the summer, once in the fall. That's how it works. We pay basically an average of the market rates. However, the municipality here, Hoffman Estates, had a municipal aggregation with a company called Allego Energy. It expired in September 2023. So I'm not too sure if it was renegotiated.
I thought it came back to ComEd. I mean, I saw it somewhere in one of the newsletters.
So I was looking around. I couldn't find any information because I think it just happened. So I don't know if there's anything online. But if it went back to ComEd, that's just how it works, right? So a municipal aggregation, to give some folks some additional information about this, is basically a program that we set up years ago where municipalities can host a referendum. The referendum basically asked residents like, hey, can we have your municipality switch you out to an alternative supplier on your behalf? Go ahead.
So on this aggregate thing, I've always wondered what they don't generate. They don't have power systems or nukes or anything. I mean, what do they do? Just some fancy financial manipulations like Enron or something? Like, we can squeeze electricity from Montana. I mean, how do they do this?
Sure. So that's a good question. So alternative suppliers in general, the way it works is that they can go to the markets just like our purchasing agencies in Illinois do, and then they can buy power on your behalf. So like there's so much power on the grid, and then you represent a very small portion of that, and they procure your small portion of energy on your behalf. And they go and they basically bid on the markets for that energy. Fine details of that, I'm not too sure how that works, but essentially it's just an offset of your energy usage. The same is true for the municipal aggregation. is that typically with the alternative suppliers, if it's like a door-to-door solicitation, they generally are much more money than what ComEd's offering at the time. However, if it's a municipal aggregation, generally speaking, they tend to be better, in some cases much better than the rates that you're seeing through the individual solicitations. I think the idea is that you have a municipality who's thinking about this stuff, there's more oversight built into the contract, and then the alternative supplier is just getting a really big contract, right? Thousands and thousands of people in one fell swoop. And it is an opt-out program, so it's not opt-in. The municipality gets to just put all of their residents into this program. You have a period of time where you can say no and you won't be transferred. But if you are transferred over and you decide you don't want to do it, you can just leave. There's no penalty when it comes to a municipal aggregation program. I took some language directly from the municipality's website. So Aligo's contract that you all just had was ComEd's price to compare, which just means ComEd's rate. But the one difference from this to ComEd's rate is that they were getting RECs, renewable energy certificates, on your behalf. So it's a one-to-one carbon offset. So they're just like basically buying renewable energy on the market on the municipality's behalf. So it's a pretty good contract. You're not paying more. You're getting some environmental benefit from that particular contract, or you were. I don't know if y'all are still on it, but that might be something to ask the folks at the village. But it was a pretty good contract. So that is a municipal aggregation contract. Go ahead.
So again, to me, the energy market should be, if they call it like in stock markets, market efficiencies. I mean, how come ComEd doesn't just get pushed down into the most cheapest energy? There should be market. How come these guys can do some razzle dazzle, financial maneuvers, but they're still plugging into everything. Like I said, they don't have a nuke plant out in the backyard.
So that's a good question. So generally speaking, municipal aggregations are a little bit different than like a standard alternative supplier contract. I think it's more important to look at like the standard alternative supplier contracts, because ComEd, generally speaking, is your best bet, because legally they cannot make money on the supply portion of the bill. You pay what they pay for on the market. This was done, it's like some wonky legislation. They call it decoupling. ComEd, well, really any utility in the state of Illinois cannot be a generator, because it's like a conflict of interest, right? They don't have any, they were to own the nuclear generation still, they don't have any vested interest in you using less. They want you to use more. However, with the supply portion, the way it's structured now is that they cannot make money there. So you're basically paying market rates through ComEd, and then these suppliers act as middlemen. So the way it works with the individual contracts, some people save money, a lot of people lose money. It's a bad gig for consumers unless it's through the municipal aggregation, and I think that's just because we're talking about much more volume there, like the municipal supply. Yeah, there's just like more stuff going on, whereas they're making they're kind of penny pinching and ripping people off in the individual solicitations that they're doing. So generally speaking, the good rule of thumb, so I know we got into the weeds here, but I'm gonna kind of like bring us back out of this. The way I think all supplier contracts should work, at least as a consumer's perspective, is you should see if you have a supplier, one. So we'll use this bill as an example. And again, it's older, so the rate for ComEd's gonna be a little bit different, but we're gonna make it work. So they had Energy Plus Holdings. The way you can see how much you're being charged to this supplier is directly under supply. There's that line item, it's commodity charge. It's arbitrary, they just like pick a random term and they throw it on there. The most important part is it has the 201 kWh, which is how much this consumer was using, at or multiplied by, in this case it was 15.9 cents, which might not make a lot of sense at the time, right? Unless you know the price to compare. But fortunately, on the ComEd bill, if you look to the right side of the bill, we have updates, Energy Plus Holdings. You go directly down, you have ComEd, and then you have the first bullet point that says price to compare. That part is very important because that is the current rate for electricity through ComEd. So if you do have an alternative supplier on your bill, regardless of it being through municipal aggregation, through an individual solicitation, the best way to know if you're saving money is to look at that price to compare and compare it to the rate that's under supply. So in this case, right, Energy Plus Holdings, 15.9 cents. ComEd's price to compare at this point in time was 7.067 cents. So this person was paying more than double for that contract with the supplier. I'm very bad at math, but we'll make it easy. We'll say it's like 50% more. So instead of paying $32 on the supply portion, they would have paid, if they were with ComEd, about 15, give or take. So it's important to look at what these companies are charging you. You know, again, if it's through the municipal aggregation, there's much more oversight built into it, but I don't know what the municipality is going to do here. You need to talk to your local elected officials, see what they think. However, if you're going back to ComEd, a lot of times like Allego or these other companies will know Hoffman Estates just ended their municipal aggregation contract. We should go and do some marketing in Hoffman Estates to see if we can like get some folks to sign up. So I think it's really important, one, if you want to entertain these markets, to know exactly what they're charging, to read the fine details, to know what ComEd's price to compare is, to know the length of the contract, all that fun stuff. But generally speaking, if you're going to entertain some of these contracts, the only value from this stuff is saving money. So if they're going to charge you more, don't do it, right? And if you find that one of these companies are on your bill and they are charging you more, it's in your best interest to cancel that contract. So let's say you go home, you see you have a company, they are charging you more money. What do? It's pretty simple. You just flip to the front part, you go back to where the supplier's information is under supply, and then they have their telephone number there, and you just need to give them a call. Got to play the game a little bit, right? They're going to like try to hit you with some new offers and be like, oh, just stick around, we'll like lower it by a little bit. It's up to you. If they give you a really good offer, ask for it in writing, right? Get the actual contract to make sure it's up to snuff. But if you do want to go ahead and process that cancellation, you just let them know. They process it. It takes a billing cycle or two to go back to ComEd. That's all it takes. And then you don't need to contact ComEd. You just need to call the company. So there's no correspondence that needs to happen with ComEd. That's on the supplier. And then you'll get a letter in the mail as well in a couple days notifying you of a change that happens on your account. That's how you deal with suppliers. So I know we got into the weeds there for a few minutes. Did folks have any clarifying questions or just general questions about the electricity bill? Sweet.
So I just wanted to point out, I'm Suzanne Ostrowski, I'm the assistant village manager. I know there were some questions about the aggregation program.
Yes, yeah, we were wondering if it's going to be extended.
So I could kind of fill in the gaps.
Sweet, please, yeah.
So I don't know, I missed most of the conversation, but just so everyone in the room is aware, our Allego program did roll off recently. And so we talked to our consultants about this. We work very closely with electricity consultants who we've worked with for many, many years. They're called NIMEC, and they specialize in municipal aggregation programs. So we talked to them a little bit about what the markets were looking like right now, and there aren't really a lot of programs out there right now for municipal aggregation that offer cost savings for residents. ComEd's rates are really, really inexpensive right now compared to what a lot of these third-party companies can offer. So as that Allego program is rolling off, we're having everybody roll back to ComEd for the village. So all of those folks who work with Allego are going to be getting letters that they're moving back to ComEd. And then we're going to look at it again when ComEd's rates come out for the next, their cycle I think is in June or something. So they'll release their rates for the next 12 months. So once that happens, we're going to look again at that and see if there's any deals to be had for aggregation, and then we'll be looking at potentially doing another aggregation program sometime in 2024.
Sweet. That's very helpful clarification. And it was a good contract too, like we talked about, because you got the environmental benefit from it, so y'all did a good job in procuring that for folks. But generally with municipal aggregations, we typically see some pretty good rates. It's just there's more oversight from folks like yourself.
So the Allego program actually was a different sort of an aggregation program because it was that green energy focused program. And Allego, the rates for the supply for electricity sort of followed the ComEd rate. So whatever ComEd was charging that particular month, Allego charged our residents as well who were part of that program. So there wasn't cost savings available for the residents through that program, but the village did, obviously, we were able to procure green energy for the residents on behalf of the residents. And then the village did get some money back from Allego that we are using for sustainability-focused programs like installing the electric car charging stations outside of Village Hall and other things like that. So.
Sweet, excellent. That's great. Right. Yeah, so municipal aggregations can be pretty good. It's just, again, the individual solicitations are the ones that you really want to look out for. But it sounds like your village is doing a good job of making sure you guys are getting a pretty good deal there. So good stuff. So any other questions about electricity before we move on to gas here? Sweet. So this is a NICOR gas bill. You guys are pretty much experts now in understanding utility bills as it stands. So a lot of the systems that we talked about on the electricity bill carry over pretty nicely onto your gas bill. So the gas bill comprises, it has those three big charges, right? The delivery fees, the taxes, and then there's something called natural gas cost, which is synonymous with supply on electricity. So again, delivery, what are you gonna do? Stay in contact with CUB, we're gonna try to fight that stuff. A lot of these things are multiplied by how much you use. So try to use a little bit less. Taxes and fees, similar boat. It's broken down a little bit different. So you can see here the taxes and fees only have a state tax and then a utility tax. Comes out to $4. Most of the other stuff is tucked into just normal delivery charges. And then you have natural gas cost, which again is synonymous with supply. And it's a little bit different for gas. The one big difference from gas to electricity is that electricity changes 2 times a year. The rate does. It changes once in the summertime, about June, and then once in the fall, October typically. Whereas with natural gas, it's much more volatile in terms of how much it costs. So here they have a December charge and a January charge under natural gas costs. Essentially, the reason they have those is because month to month it can change, and then your usage and your billing cycle varies. A lot of times it's not a perfect month, right? It's gonna be a little bit in this case, this is a December-January bill, so a little bit in December. This person had 48.64 therms in December, and then they had 129.6 therms in January. So it's like end of December, most of January for this consumer. So they break out those charges so you know exactly what you're being charged, because potentially gas rates could be different month to month. In this case, it's 29 cents both months. And this is an older bill, 2021. I need to update my bills, what I'm realizing here, but all the info is still the same. So that's how those three portions work. And then of course, if you look to the right, under monthly energy profile, we have how much we're using in that bar graph. Similarly to electricity, there's some good things to look out for, specifically how much you're using in the current month compared to last year's month. So in this case, this person also moved. That's why you see those 2 zeros there right before March. But you could do that comparison to see if you're up or down, to see if you're overusing, see if there's any big jumps. And then if you go below that bar graph, you can see the average temperature, which on gas, it's a little more important because with electricity, like we talked about, there are several different elements that build into our electricity bill, right? A lot of different appliances, cooling, all that fun stuff kind of builds up into our electricity bills. However, with gas, it's your heating, right? And then it's your hot water, and then maybe your laundry, maybe the dishes, right? But it's very few things. It's mostly the heating costs, which is why with gas, especially on this bill, you can see it during the winter, bar graph goes up, and then it makes a U shape, right? It goes down to virtually nothing and goes it goes right back up in the winter time. And that's because gas during the summer is mostly cooking hot water. But this is a good place where you can see what the price is. You can also see the price to compare under natural gas costs, which is directly under average temperature. So if you are thinking about suppliers, because suppliers do exist in the gas market as well, that's a place where you could see what the gas rate is. But we find, generally speaking, that gas suppliers just wouldn't even think about it. Electricity is a little more complex because of municipal aggregations, because sometimes you can get a better electric rate through one of these companies. It's rare, but we do see it. However, with gas, generally speaking, we just don't see good contracts. We did a study several years ago, and we looked at about 12,000 gas contracts with an alternative supplier, and we found that 94% of those contracts ended up losing money over the length of the contract. So good riddance to the gas suppliers. They're generally bad news. The way you would know if you had a gas supplier on your utility bill is where I have those 2 yellow arrows. So what would happen is if that you did have a gas supplier, the natural gas cost section would disappear from the left side of your bill, and then it would be added to the right side of your bill, which is where that big yellow circle is. And that's where you would see if you had a supplier, and you can also see the details of the contract. So how much you owe, and then also the price per therm. And again, to know if you have a good rate through one of these suppliers, you would see, for example, on this bill, they were paying 43 cents per therm, which a therm is similar to a kilowatt hour. It's the measurement of the gas. And then you could look down to the current month. So this was March, and the rate at Nicor was I think it was 28 cents if I'm seeing that correctly. So they were paying, a little bit more through the gas supplier. So if you were to go home, look at your gas bill, you notice that you're paying more with the supplier. Similarly to the suppliers on electricity, you would just call their number that's listed up to the top right there. You'd let them know that you wanted to cancel. It takes a billing cycle or 2 to go back to the default utility. business as usual. So generally speaking, suppliers, you need to be a little wary of them. But again, gas, electricity, the surefire way to know if you're losing money is just to look at how much they're charging you, assess with the price to compare. If you're losing money, cancel the contract. If you're saving some money, stick around, just keep an eye on it.
Is there a price to compare?
There is a price to compare. So if you look, it's kind of hard. It's the fine print here, but I'm going to walk in front of this. It's right down here. So each one of those little numbers is how much it costs that particular month with the default utility. Cool. Any questions about gas? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just heard today gas prices going to be going up in January. Nicor and the other three or whatever are jacking up $9 a month about. So Interstate Commerce Commission, are they the watchers? Like, why? Because these guys are a monopoly. And Nicor is saying, oh, we got to rip up 100-year-old pipes, we got to do all this stuff. Don't they build this cost in their business? I mean, General Motors doesn't go out, you know, asking the taxpayers or whatever to start, you know, hey, we need a new factory. So you're the watchers watching the watcher?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very good question. So like I mentioned earlier, every utility is asking for more money right now. So I wish I remember the number, but it's over $1 billion collectively across the state from all of the utilities, Nicor included. Real big chunks of money is what they're asking for. And it's complicated. Like rate making is a very complicated thing because they are like this public and private entity. It's a very strange kind of operation. And the Illinois Commerce Commission is our public utility commission, which is the watcher of this or the arbiter of how much money the utilities get. The process is a little more complicated than this, but generally to like kind of break it down, the utilities go to the ICC and they say, we want X amount of money. And then consumer advocates like CUB, Public Interest Research Group is another group that's been doing a lot of work around this. We'll go together. We'll say like, no way, they don't need this much. Sometimes they do need more money for various things. Like we got to have a good system in place. Like we want the pipes to be replaced and not to explode and stuff like that. It's like, you know, we understand that, but a lot of times they're asking for way more than they need. Typically it's through like a return on equity, so stuff for their investors. It's a complicated, messy process, but if that stuff upsets you, again, stay in contact with CUB because we have been going to the public meetings at the Illinois Commerce Commission to advocate on behalf of consumers to say like, hey, this is too much, times are tough, et cetera. And I think it's important to have that kind of public support.
Well, they're looking for money for decommissioning nuclear plants where downstate, whatever. Then they build, I mean, why am I got to pay? I mean, you guys should be, financing your own decommissioning. And then the reason I'm ticked off is the CEO of ComEd and the rest of her cronies are all in trial, for corruption and bribery. So, cry me a river. I'm not, buying this.
I hear you. It's tough because CUB and other consumer advocates we're nonprofits, and like CUB has 2 attorneys, and then we'll like hire.
I heard something in the hallways, whispers like corruption and all this stuff, but you can't, whatever you hear is what can you prove, right?
Exactly, and it's tough because again we're like nonprofits and we're going up against these very, very well-paid attorneys, and I think we do a good job, but I think it emphasizes the need for folks like yourself who are thinking about this and are upset about this to participate and voice those concerns, because the Illinois Commerce Commission is, they work for you essentially, right? It's a part of the state, so you want to make sure that they know that you're not okay with, those kinds of rate hikes. And we need that kind of support, because if they're just hearing from our 2 attorneys and then all of the ComEd attorneys who are, shaking hands, kissing babies, et cetera, like it's problematic. We need the community to go and say, hey, like we're showing up to these meetings, this is not okay, the status quo doesn't fly, things are really expensive, et cetera. So we hear you, we just need more participation. So if that upsets you, again, stay in contact with us, because we have a lot of avenues. We have a volunteer team. We're doing a lot of like public actions out in the field to do some advocacy around this. So these are good questions, and I think you're right to be upset, because things just keep getting more expensive, and it seems like it's every avenue of our life. Like costs just keep going and going, right?
Green energy always going to be rainbows and butterflies, and you go down south and there's a million windmills out there, and I don't see anything getting any better.
The green energy is good stuff. I think as if you look at the markets, and I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but we can always talk afterwards, but green energy typically sells for cheaper on the markets, like more affordable than the fossil fuel alternatives. So we're actually seeing like Wind power is much cheaper. Solar power is much cheaper. Generally speaking, like fossil fuels are just propped up by incentives and tax credits, and it's kind of showing now. So, but we're getting to the weeds here. I'm going to keep moving because I know we are kind of. Of course, yeah.
So, can you explain why the monthly customer charge is so high for NICOR versus ComEd? Because NICOR's charging now like $20, $21 a month for their customer charge.
It's very expensive. That's kind of part of it. People's Gas, the Chicago utility, has an insanely high customer charge, and a lot of it's tied to infrastructure projects like upgrading pipelines and stuff like that, which of course they need to do. We need to pay for it. You can't they can be a safety hazard, but the question is like, how do we do it? What areas do we target? For example, in Chicago, the monthly fixed charges, if you don't use gas, I live in Chicago. I didn't really use gas in the summer, right? I was cooking hot water, that's it. My bill is $65 because the customer charge is like about 30 something, and then there's something called the qualified infrastructure plant charge, which you can also see at the bottom of this bill that pays for that infrastructure. And then when you take those two together, you're paying a lot of money for these infrastructure projects that we might not need to pay as much. But again, that's like, it's the tough gig of being a consumer advocate or a resident in this kind of weird space of like utility regulations. It's really wonky, and they get a lot of money for this stuff. So, again, file petitions, stay in contact, let your, this would be the Illinois Commerce Commission would be the avenue of like folks to contact to say you want to fight those rate hikes. So that's a good question. It's a good eye. It is for all gas entities, their customer charge is really high, which it's tied to those infrastructure upgrades. So, go ahead.
Which of the charges pays for their lawyers?
That's a good question. Isn't that fun? We get to pay for their lawyers and their charitable giving. It's great. I'm not sure. I think that might be tucked into the customer charge. I'm sure it's like, you could see it. You could go into a tariff if you have like the wherewithal to go into there, and you could see where their money's coming from. But you do pay for their attorneys, which is kind of unfortunate. And you pay for their charitable giving. So oftentimes if you go to one of these public meetings, the utilities like to talk about how much money they give to charity. It's not them, it's you guys. You guys are giving to charity. They're using your money. So the gas rate is 42 cents per therm right now this month through NICOR. Again, that changes every single month, so keep an eye on that. So we're going to switch off to some programs. I know we just talked about decoding our bill. Exhilarating stuff, I know, but I think it's important. It's important to know exactly what's happening on your bill, because now, month to month, you can take a look and you can know what's happening and what these line items are doing. You can better track that. But there are some good programs out there that can help folks pay your bill if you are income qualified. And I know some folks may be income qualified here, some folks might not be, so I'll run through this rather quickly, but it is good to know that there are some programs out there that can help you with your bill. The first one is one of the more important ones. It's called LIHEAP. It's open every winter. It's the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. It's a financial grant you can get on your gas and electric bill. We are in Cook County, right? I'm not making that up. Not crazy. So CETA is the Community Action Agency, which they're the agencies who administer various income qualified programs. They're the folks that you would need to call. So it's 200% federal poverty level. To see if you qualify, you can go online to CETA's website, or you can contact them, this 800-571-2332 number. It opened up October 2nd. For seniors, families with children under 6, and then folks with disabilities. November 1st is open for folks who have some kind of pending disconnection, and then December 1st, open to the public. So that's a good one, and it gives you some really neat consumer protections. Things like if you're struggling to pay your bill and you're like worried about disconnection, it can prevent you from disconnection during the wintertime. A couple other little cool things that can happen there. Generally speaking, with financial assistance, we think it's very important just to contact your utilities. I know it's like, seems counterintuitive if you're like struggling on your bills. Like, I don't want to contact the utility because I have a past due, but oftentimes the utilities, they want you to stay connected, right? And there might be some money available to help you stay connected. So specifically with the gas companies, NICOR in this case, there's about $500 available as a one-time grant if you are income qualified. So if you do have a large arrearage, that can help you pay it down. For NICOR, you would need to go to a local Salvation Army in person in order to get that process started. And then lastly, there's a program called the Illinois Home Weatherization Assistance Program, or IWAP, which again, income qualified, but it's really neat because a lot of times when we're struggling to make ends meet, it's because our utility bills are just really expensive, and could be because we have older housing stock in Cook County, and when those homes were built, they weren't necessarily built with efficiency in mind, so it could be hard to heat and cool your home when the weather's at its most extreme. But with IWAP, there's about $16,000 available per home to make energy efficiency or weatherization upgrades. Stuff like air sealing, attic and wall insulation, HVAC repair or replacement, water heater repair or replacement, electric base load reduction, lighting and refrigerator replacement. That's what that means. And then ventilation and moisture control or other health and safety features. I think there's about $3,500 available for that too. So if they're like doing the work in your home and they notice there's some mold, they can take care of that for you. So again, this would be through CETA at the same number. So if you do think you qualify, give them a ring. It's a really good program. Lastly, there is a program, it's a joint program through ComEd, People's Gas, and the Chicago Bungalow Association. We're not in Chicago, but this is a Cook County-based program. Super cool. Bungalow Association, cool organization, kind of like a historical preservation organization for like the older homes in the Chicagoland area, but they partnered with ComEd to do kind of like a step-down version of IWAP. So essentially it's like a free home energy assessment that you get where they come in and identify any inefficiencies in your home, and then they can do some upgrades. And I saw the statistics from last year. They're giving out about $9,000 per home that qualified to make these kinds of changes. The one key difference between IWAP and this program is that instead of using 200% federal poverty level, which is what a lot of these programs that we were looking at on the former slide use, they use 80% area median income, which is a much higher threshold. So 80% AMI for a household of four would need to be at $83,000 or below it. And I think for a household of one in this area, it's about $58,000. So it depends on how many folks are living in the home, where you're at, but more folks will qualify for this program than I think folks think they do. A couple other factors is it needs to be a single family home or a two flat that's at least 30 years old, needs to be owner occupied, and needs to be located in Cook County. So to apply, learn more about the program, you can go to chicagobungalow.org/apply, or they have that 312-675-0300 number that you can contact. It's a cool program. So I know we are pushing on time. We got started a few minutes late here, but we're going to get through energy efficiency, and I think I might be able to talk about solar for a few minutes, but we'll see. We'll see how quick we get through this. But energy efficiency, the unsung hero, truly, when it comes to reducing cost in your home, reducing your carbon footprint. We have kind of a goofy mantra at the CUB office, but I think it's a good one. It's the cheapest kilowatt hour of the therm is the one that you don't use. Doesn't mean live by candlelight, just means take advantage of the programs that are available or the newer technologies that can help you reduce energy. So the first one is energy efficient lighting. So about 15% of our overall electricity bills come from lighting. And if you still have old incandescents in your home, they last a bit, right? And they could be lingering. You could be missing out on potential saving opportunities because LEDs use about 80% less energy than an incandescent bulb, and they last like 30 years. So if you're to make the swap from incandescents to LEDs, you can reduce that 15% by approximately 80%, which is pretty neat. There is a concept called vampire power. Folks aware of that? Kind of, sort of, some heads nodding. It's kind of a goofy name, but fitting because it's spooky season, right? We're in October, so I kind of like it. But ultimately, this is when appliances are plugged in, and even if you're not using them, they're still drawing energy passively, right? And there have been estimates that this can be as high as 23% of our overall bills come from vampire power, which I know a lot of folks are like, that's not true. A lot of the new appliances that are being built account for that, which is true. It got as high as 23%. Appliance manufacturers know that. They're working on reducing it, but you can't switch out all of your appliances to the newest, latest, and greatest, right? So if you still have some lingering appliances, it could be that your vampire load is a bit higher than it should be, which is about 23%. And they oftentimes tie it to things like this, right? These smarter appliances, we're getting these like boxes you can put in your home, and you can like yell at it, and it'll tell you the weather, which is nice. But even if you're not using it, that device typically is always on, and it's processing data constantly, right? So that starts to add up. You can't get the vampire power number to zero, right? We just like kind of need passive energy usage in our home. It's just the way that our homes are built nowadays, like refrigerator, kind of need that, right? But the general idea of reducing this is to unplug appliances that you're not using. So in my kitchen, for example, I have a stove with a clock on it, microwave with the clock on it, and then we have an espresso machine that has a clock on it. So I just unplug the espresso machine and the microwave. They're on the same power strip. It's like not going to make or break my bill, right? But again, with electricity, the idea is that there are all of these different variables that are adding up to the overall bill. So it's generally like 3% here, 4% here, switching out LED light bulbs. Efficiency is kind of incremental changes that then can really result in some significant reductions on your overall bill. Programmable thermostats are super key. I think they're really important, and it depends on the programmable thermostat you have. I am a renter, and I am subject to the jankiest programmable thermostat I have ever seen. It's like taking algebra all over again in high school because I'm like trying to figure out how to program it. It could be a real pain, but if you figure out how to program your thermostat, the way it works is that there are two temperatures you want to aim for, depending on the season, right? It's 68 degrees in the wintertime, 78 degrees in the summer, and let's say you're going to work every day or you're going to school every day, whatever that might be, but you prefer, we'll use winter as an example, 70 degrees during the winter time. You can have it set to 70 degrees when you're home, but you can program your thermostat to step down to, let's say, 66 or 67 degrees when you're gone, and then maybe an hour or two before you come home, you have it kick back on to your desired temperature, and then you come home and it's the same temperature, right? Nothing has changed. You're not heating the home for ghosts, right? You're keeping it down so you're not using as much energy when you're gone, but then when you're coming back, it's the same old, right? That's how you use a programmable thermostat. And you can see some pretty significant savings if you utilize that appropriately. And they can be hard to program, but they do have these newer smart thermostats like Nest, CUB. There's like a million different kinds now at this point. A lot of times if you go to ComEd's website, they have real like serious discounts on these things. I saw one that was like $1 at the time you could buy it for. So go online and see what they have. But smart thermostats are a bit easier to program. They tap into your smartphone if you have one of those, and you can like pull up an actual calendar. It's a little more streamlined. And then lastly, ceiling fans can work too. They're pretty important. You can change the way a ceiling fan rotates. So during the wintertime, you want it to be clockwise because heat rises. You want to push that heat back down, but you want to make sure you don't turn the fan on as fast as it can go, right? Because it's just going to clear out all of that heat. You just want like kind of a slow and steady spin to push that heat down. And in the summertime, counterclockwise. Cold air falls, you want to pick it back up and rotate it around the room. Another important thing is fans cool people, not rooms. So if you leave, turn it off. It's a myth that it like is helping like cool down the room during the summertime. And then lastly, we have energy efficiency programs to the utilities. And I know we're pushing time here. I think I'm going to be able to get through these efficiency programs, and then maybe we'll call it to let folks go because I know we're at the top of the hour. And I'll stick around for questions if folks have any. But there are some super cool energy efficiency programs that you can tap into that can help reduce your bill quite a bit. The first one is called hourly pricing, which you can find it at hourlypricing.comed.com. You can also call them and ask them about it. This goes back all the way to electricity, right? And the price of electricity is technically a fixed rate. Changes once in the summer, once in the fall. And that is generally an average of what you see here. So this bar graph I took directly from the hourly pricing website. The rates for electricity change hour to hour based on demand. And again, you kind of pay some average of that. And there's some adjustments through a purchased electricity adjustment that they put on your bill. But you can opt into hourly pricing and pay the hour-to-hour rates of electricity. It is a risk or reward program, I will preface, because it depends on when you're using energy. So I took this from earlier in the summer, this is from July, and you can see throughout the day, the price was lower than 2 cents per kilowatt hour, which is great, because it's much lower than what ComEd's rate was. But once we got to like 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., the price jumped quite a bit. And then it fell back down again. And that's the typical pattern we see with hourly pricing is people use more like 3 to 7 p.m. It's when people are coming home, they're doing the dishes, etc. So we're seeing higher energy usage during that time, so the prices go up. The idea is that if you're on hourly pricing, you use outside of those peak times when the prices are cheaper, and you can really work it out to get some pretty significant savings. When I was on the program, we were doing like 25% savings on the supply portion of our bill, just by shifting our usage outside of those peak times. It's really good for folks who have a higher energy usage portfolio. So if you have electric heat, it's really good because on average, the price is much cheaper, right? Like 80% of the time, it's just a few hours that spike. So overall, if you have a higher energy load, you're generally gonna pay less money. It's really good if you have an electric vehicle because there are certain scenarios in which the energy prices go into the negatives. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen enough where I see it when I'm like looking at this stuff for events, where if, you know, it went into the negatives, it's at 8 a.m. and you need to charge your electric vehicle, you charge it during that time and you're essentially building up a credit when you charge, which is pretty cool. And the reverse is true for like laundry, right? Or the dishes, these big ticket items that you're doing, you want to shift them to when the times are the cheapest. So can get a little crazy though. So this slide was from July 23rd. This is from July 21st, a few days before that. You can see it went into the red for an hour. It was just an hour, but if you had, let's use the electric vehicle in this example, and you were charging at 4 p.m. because you're like, it'll be fine, I'm not gonna look at it. You were paying, I think this is like 30 cents per kilowatt hour. That would be a very expensive bill. So it is risk or reward, right? You need to pay attention to what the prices are. Generally when they do spike, it spikes for like an hour, maybe two. So it's not the end of the world. You can like move it outside of that general hump there. But if you don't have the ability to do that or the desire to do that, this might not be the program for you. But if you are able to be vigilant and you can see what you're using hour to hour, this can be a really like good program. So the way you know if you're saving, if you do sign up for the program, every single month they give you a report. This is from my account. I took this when I first signed up for the program. They'll show you what your total savings are. They show you what your price would have been if you were just with ComEd on their default structure. This is all through ComEd too. You're not switching to a different company. It's all through ComEd. They'll show you what you paid on hourly pricing and then what you saved this month. It's pretty neat. So you can try the program out and you can see if you're saving some energy and money, and then if you're not, you can shift off of the program. But it might be worth looking into, especially again if you have a higher like base load of energy usage. There's another program called Peak Time Savings, which is our all carrot, no stick version of hourly pricing. Because the general idea is that when we see that price spike, there are a lot of things that are happening, right? The price of energy is going up. It also means we need to generate energy quickly to make sure that when you flip that light switch on, we have energy, right? Generally speaking, we pay billions, with a B, of dollars every single year in Northern Illinois alone to make sure that we have energy online at that time. It is so expensive. Typically, it's like the dirtiest fossil fuel power plants you can get because it's like quick and dirty is the idea, and it's very expensive. We pay these like really large contracts out to these fossil fuel companies. Nobody wants to do this, right? We don't want to do this. It's very expensive, it's very dirty. So ideally, we want people to move their usage outside of these really big spikes, which is the idea of hourly pricing and also peak time savings. The way peak time savings works is that if you sign up for peak time savings, they'll notify you of events that we just saw, for example, on July 21st, and they'll say, hey, Mrs. Smith, from 2 to 4 p.m., use less than you typically would. If you do, you get approximately $1 per kilowatt hour that you saved. If not, nothing happens, right? All carrot, no stick. It's just kind of more of a notification to let folks know like, hey, energy grid's a little crazy right now. Just use a little bit less than you normally would, or try to shift like doing the dishes, doing the laundry outside of that, and then you can get a little like financial boon on your bill if you're able to make that happen. If not, nothing happens. You can be on hourly pricing and peak time savings at the same time. I think peak time savings, if you're not signed up for it, it's a no-brainer. You should definitely do it. Hourly pricing, you want to give a little more thought to it because you can lose money if you're not using the program efficiently. Lastly, there is a home energy assessment that is available. It's a joint program through People's Gas, Nicor, ComEd customers. You can get a free energy assessment. I'll be honest, it's like pretty facade level. They like come and like poke around or like, oh, your windows look good. But the most important piece of this is they give you a bunch of free energy efficiency appliances. So you get a programmable thermostat if you don't already have one, LEDs if you don't have an energy efficient bulb in that fixture. And we're like, this is every fixture too. Low flow shower heads, faucet aerators, hot water pipe insulation, all for free. They come out, they do the assessment, and they install these products for you. And then during the assessment, you can also get a smart thermostat and a smart power strip if you qualify. So they'll ask you like, hey, Ms. Smith, do you make X amount of money or lower? And if you're like, yes, I do, then you get those appliances for free. So it's free smart power strip, plural, and then a smart thermostat as well. And then you can call this number down here, 855-433-2700. I also have fact sheets in the back that talk about this. I don't know if I laid these out, but if you're interested in learning more, I can get them out as you guys are exiting. Okay, we're making good time here. So I'm gonna do like a real quick solar, 2-minute solar, real fast, and then we'll end, I promise. So going solar, really good time. If you've been thinking about it, now is probably the time to do it because the incentives are like 10 out of 10 right now because of some legislation we passed as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So right now, the federal government gives you a 30% tax credit. So 30% of the total cost of your solar system can come back on your taxes, which is pretty nice. And then there's also something called the Solar Renewable Energy Credit, or the SREC, which is created from some legislation we passed a few years back. And then that can cover anywhere from 20 to 30%. Oftentimes it can be a little bit higher than 30%. So realistically, you can cover about 60% the total cost of your solar system through the incentives that exist, making it way more affordable than folks think it is. It's hard to give like averages and numbers because every home's different. There's different pieces to a solar system, inverters, type of solar panels, how old is your roof, do you need a roof replacement, do you have shading, a lot of variables. But I think if you're thinking about solar, the incentives are in a really good spot right now, so you should definitely look into it if you can. And then we're a net metered state, meaning that the way the solar system works is that you put the panels on your rooftop, sun hits them right, they're happy, they're generating energy. That energy runs through your home, so your appliances use that energy, and then anything that your appliances don't use gets spit out into the grid, and ComEd is legally required to credit you 1-to-1. So for every kilowatt hour you put on the grid, you get a credit back. The idea is that we're not Arizona, right? We still get very good sunshine, we're in a good space for solar, but we do have gloomy days. The idea is that your solar panels will over-generate a little bit, build up a credit on your bill, and then for the months where we're not seeing as much sun as we did in like the summer, you can tap into that credit. So it reduces your bill to virtually nothing, which is pretty nice. So it's a good time to go solar. We have a lot of fact sheets back there. But that being said, I think that about wraps it up for me. I'm gonna go to the last slide here because I have my information. So if you ever wanna chat, you can contact our hotline. Again, it's a really good resource. And then I'm always down to talk to you. That's my email there. And I'll stick around for a few minutes. But appreciate y'all. Thanks for sticking around for the hour. I know it's been a long morning for most folks here, going meeting to meeting, but appreciate it. And shout out to the village for having me as well. Thanks, folks.